Hi guys! Today I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in January. Before I get into this, I just want to clarify, I know star ratings can be really subjective for some people, so I just want to lay out what they mean to me personally. So a 5-star for me is I absolutely loved it. Probably one of my favorite books of all time. 4 stars is I really enjoyed it. Maybe not the most perfect book, but it was awesome. 3 stars is I liked it. This is not a bad score. I feel like some people think 3 stars is like I hated this book, but it was a good book. 2 stars is it was okay. Didn't blow me out of the water or anything, but it was fine. 1 star is I did not like it. Now that that's out there, we can continue. The first book that I read this month was How the King of Elfhame Learned to Hate Stories. This one feels kind of like cheating because I'm pretty sure I started it on New Year's Eve and I read it in one sitting, and by the time I was finished, it was past midnight. But it counts. This book is a novella tied to the Folk of the Air series, so The Cruel Prince, Wicked King, and Queen of Nothing. And this is all from Carden's perspective, and it's really short. It's just a little novella, and I gave this one 4 stars. It was really well written, and it's really beautifully illustrated. This is the Owl Crate edition, so it's kind of like this teal color instead of the white. And on the inside of the dust jacket, it's actually got an illustration of Carden as well, so that's really cool. And then the book itself is also really pretty. It's got like this blue foil to it. So it's a beautiful book. It's illustrated by Ravina Kai, and I think she did an amazing job sort of capturing the dark, kind of whimsical vibe of the original trilogy. This is Carden and Jude from the first book when they're mad at each other. And it covers the time period from when Carden is a child to just a little bit after Queen of Nothing. So this one's much different stylistically than the original trilogy. It kind of reads more like a fairy tale or a bedtime story. It's very short, again, like both in length, and then when you flip it open, the margins are huge. So it has a bit more of like a children's book feel to it, where the original trilogy is definitely more like YA. And I think that's why I gave it 4 stars. It was really enjoyable. Again, I finished this in one sitting. I wasn't mad about it by any means, but I just wanted more, and I'm always gonna want more of Carden and Jude and of this world. It's so delightful, and I think especially after Queen of Nothing was a little bit of a weaker ending in my opinion, and I still really loved it. I loved the whole series, but I was really looking forward to this one, and I was left wanting more. So it was really well done. Again, the illustrations are beautiful. Definitely I love displaying this on my shelf, and it was a good way to start off the month. It was a nice, fun, light read. The next book I read in January was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. Like everyone and their mother last year, I read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, and I was absolutely taken with it. I thought V.E. Schwab's writing is just so beautiful, and it's not like overly flowery, but she just has a way with words that really punches you in the gut, and I was so impressed by that. And I picked up the Darker Shade of Magic, the first book in that trilogy, first, but I read about Vicious and Vengeful, and I knew those were the next 2 books by her that I wanted to tackle. So if you don't know, this is sort of like it's like a more superhero sci-fi thing than fantasy. It covers these 2 roommates, Victor and Eli. They're in their last semester of college working on their senior theses. They're both looking to go into like the medical field, and Victor's thesis is about how like adrenaline affects brain chemistry, and Eli decides to write his thesis on EOs, and that means extraordinaries. And in this world, those are sort of like a conspiracy theory almost. It's rumors of people with these special abilities online. You know, he has to scrounge through forums and whatnot, and Victor is very confused as to why his normally very sort of pragmatic friend is kind of chasing this weird conspiracy theory, and it piques his interest. And they end up sort of working together because Victor's thesis is sort of related to that, and they both sort of end up coming to the conclusion that all of these people with these rumored abilities experience near-death experiences, and the effect of a near-death experience like floods your brain with adrenaline, and it permanently affects their brain chemistry, and it gives them these weird abilities. So they decide to try this out for themselves. And that goes about as well as you'd expect, but it does work. And they end up sort of pitted against each other. And this book is sort of structured with a dual timeline. So it's following them in college, working towards trying to get these abilities for themselves. And then about 15 years later, Victor breaking out of prison and trying to find Eli to get his revenge. And you don't know why he was in prison. You don't know why he's mad at Eli. And so both timelines are working or moving forward to kind of figure that out. So it's a bit of a mystery. If you like superhero and morally gray characters, this is an amazing book to pick up. I've heard it described as kind of like a Professor X Magneto sort of relationship. And I get what they're going with that when they say that, but no one in this book is Professor X. I hesitate to even say they're both Magneto because the true Magneto of this series does not pop up until the next book, and I'll get to that in a minute. But they're both very morally gray and kind of more on their own sides. But you find yourself, at least I found myself especially rooting for Victor. He's not a good guy, but like I get what he's doing. And it was just a fascinating read. I love books that sort of challenge your worldview in that way. And all the special powers are really interesting and fascinating, and they don't even quite reveal what Victor's and Eli's powers are right away. So it's sort of a mystery. And it was a really fun read. I gave this a 5 out of 5. I think this would make an excellent movie. I hope somebody adapts it because I think it would be really fun. It was really cinematic. The action was well written. Again, V.E. Schwab just creates this world that is so fascinating and it feels real. Like it feels like, yeah, EOs are among us. So I loved that. So because I loved Vicious so much, I decided to pick up the next book in the duology, Vengeful. And I can't go too into the details about this one without spoiling what happens in the first one. I will say characters from the first one are also in this one, if you loved them. And it also introduces quite a few new EOs, which makes things a little more complicated. And like I said earlier, the true Magneto of the series is in this one. Her name is Marcella. And Marcella is a mob wife, basically. And she finds out her husband is cheating on her and decides to kill him. But he beats her to the punch. At least he thinks so. She ends up surviving this near-death experience, and she ends up with this crazy, powerful, destructive ability. And so she's really set up as one of the main antagonists of this one, and she is very ambitious. She goes from being a mob wife that no one really takes seriously because she's so beautiful and she's a woman, to basically wanting to take over the entire city because she's got this power, and she's like, yeah, we're superior, why shouldn't we be in charge? Which, that's Magneto. And she ends up surrounding herself with other EOs and whatnot to do this, which is something that you haven't really seen with the behavior of EOs in the past. So again, I can't go too much more into detail without giving things away from the series as a whole. I did give this one a 4 out of 5 just because it was a little more convoluted. The first book had a excellent idea and executed it, I thought, perfectly. This one, where you're bouncing between so many characters' perspectives, and it also has sort of like a dual timeline thing going, and it's all counting down to this one night. It's followable, but it's definitely a little more convoluted. But it's still an excellent story. Again, B. Schwab, there's some great one-liners in here. She's good at those. And I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I believe this is currently a duology, but she did announce recently that there's going to be a third book. So I will definitely pick that up when it comes out. Next up, I have a couple graphic novels. The first is Nimona by Noelle Stevenson. This I gave a 4 out of 5 as well. If you don't know, Noelle Stevenson is the showrunner of She-Ra on Netflix, and they also have another graphic novel series called Lumberjanes, which I haven't read, but I'm very interested in reading. It looks really, really fun. This graphic novel follows Nimona, and she's a shapeshifter, and one day she decides she's going to be Lord Blackheart's sidekick, and he's a villain. And together they're going to bring down this organization called the Institution. And the Institution is like a group of heroes, basically, to trying to protect the land. And their star hero is Sir Goldenloin. Sir Blackheart and Sir Goldenloin have an interesting past that's sort of hinted at. And Blackheart himself was once a member of the Institution. And Goldenloin had a hand in sort of making him the villain he is. So it explores their past. And it also explores Nimona herself. She's a very mysterious figure. Her powers of shapeshifting are something that no one has ever seen before. She's able to become like a giant dragon, and she's also able to become like a little tiny like insect basically. And Lord Blackheart is a man of science and magic, and he's never seen anything like it. And they sort of, at first he kind of rejects her, like he's like, I don't need a sidekick. But they end up growing this really fun relationship, and they've got a really great dynamic. And I give this one a 4 out of 5 stars as well. I'm sort of torn on this one because again, I just wanted more. It was such a fun story. And I feel like it could have gone into much further detail on everyone's like backstories, especially Nimona specifically. It explores her backstory, but like I feel like it doesn't really give you a definitive answer to it. And again, it was just such a fun world. I want someone to make an animated show out of this. I'd watch the hell out of that. It was really fun, and the humor was great. It was. I appreciate a standalone graphic novel, but this one could be a whole series, and I want that. I just want that so bad. The next graphic novel I have is Anya's Ghost. I picked this one up kind of on an impulse while browsing Book Outlet. It was on sale for like $6. I knew nothing about it going in, but I thought the art was really cute. It's all like black and white, unlike most graphic novels, I feel. And this one follows the story of Anya, and she and her family are from Russia, and she's worked really hard to fit in to her American private school and get rid of her accent and try to be a cool kid. There's another Russian kid at her school who she, even though like their shared cultural background should bring them together, she finds herself kind of like pushing him away because she doesn't want to be associated with his sort of dorkiness, and she just wants to fit in and be cool. She's got a crush on a boy who's dating like a very popular girl. So I feel like, you know, there's elements that you can definitely relate to. I think if you weren't like the most popular kid in school. And one day she's walking home and she kind of cuts through the woods and she ends up falling in this well that was like all covered up with grass and stuff. It's a very deep well. She can't get out by herself, and she's hurt herself in her fall. And while down there, she realizes there's a skeleton. And if that's not creepy enough, a ghost pops out of the skeleton. It's the ghost of another little girl. And she claims she was murdered, which is horrifying. And her and Anya end up talking a little bit while Anya's like waiting to get saved, basically. And Anya at first is like rejecting the fact that she's even seeing a ghost. She's like, this isn't happening, because she's never seen one before. That's not like a normal part of this universe. And when she ends up getting saved, she ends up like a bone of the little girl ends up in her bag. And so the girl who's tied to her skeleton is able to sort of follow her. And at first Anya is like, leave me alone, please. This is so freaky. But the girl ends up kind of helping her cheat on tests and do well in school, and gives her like intel on how to impress this guy that she likes. And so Anya's doing pretty well, and she's starting to get popular at school. And in exchange for this girl's help, she's like, I'm gonna help figure out your murder, because it was never figured out. And so she ends up doing some digging and finds out things are not quite what they seem. This was a fun book. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. I liked it. It didn't blow me away or anything. I'll definitely keep it. It was cute and a nice fast read, but it's not like my favorite graphic novel by any means. It was a fun time. Switching gears back to novels, I read Outlawed by Anna North this month, and I mentioned this in my previous haul video and my January TBR. This is a feminist western. It takes place in like an alternate history United States where there was this pandemic basically that wiped out a bunch of people, and society kind of as we know it sort of fell. Like the United States isn't a thing anymore. It's like all these townships and stuff that are independent of one another, and because the population really suffered during the sickness, having kids is like really important. And it also seems like this, it's never really directly stated, but it seems like the sickness may have also affected fertility, because it's like a really widespread problem that women who can't conceive in like the first year or two of marriage end up getting cast out of their marriage homes or being suspected of being a witch. And in that case, your options are basically to get hanged as a witch or to go to a convent. So that's kind of what ends up happening to our main character, Ada. But convent life is not for her. She is the daughter of a midwife. Before she got cast out of her community, she wanted to be a midwife herself. So she's a woman of science. You know, she's like, there's got to be a reason that I can't conceive a child. So she kind of goes out into the world seeking that, and ends up with this group of people called the Hole in the Wall Gang. And it's run by this person named the Kid. And this gang is made up of mostly other barren women and other sort of social outcasts. One of them is a black woman who was, outed from her community. And there's this whole thing going on in the background about some preachers going around and proclaiming that mixing, black and white people results in infertility and monsters and stuff, and just horrible, horrible stuff. So this gang just wants to find a place in the world for outcasts like them, basically. They're not worthless just because they can't have kids or because they're different. And so Ada ends up joining up with them because she's of the similar mindset, and she becomes like their doctor, basically. This was a really fun book. I'm not usually a Western kind of gal, but it was fun. I liked the feminist sort of spin on the genre, and the fact that it was like sort of alternate reality. It was familiar enough, but also made for a really unique story. So I gave this one a 3 out of 5. It was a fun adventure, but I feel like just something was kind of missing. I was looking for more of a resolution at the end that we didn't quite get. And my biggest issue, I think, throughout the novel was I feel like there would be a lot of like rising tension. Something was about to happen. This action was about to take place. And then it would like cut to the next scene and like the action happened. And so you lose all the tension that way. And so that was my biggest frustration with this, but it was a fun novel, and I do really like this cover. But yeah, so this one was a 3 out of 5. The next book I have is The Winter of the Witch by Catherine Arden. This is the 3rd book in the Winter Night series, so I can't talk too much about it without giving spoilers. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. The previous installments were both 5s out of 5s for me. So this one was like just a smidge of a letdown. I thought it was a good conclusion, but it kind of felt like it ended halfway through, and then there was still like 150 pages left. I was very confused by like just the pacing of this one. The action that takes place in like the last third of the novel feels kind of like it could be its own story. So that was a little confusing to me. But overall, I still enjoyed it. I loved all the characters in this series from beginning to end. I thought their development was awesome. I love the historical fantasy aspect of this series. It's beautifully written, beginning to end. So this was not a bad book by any means. 4 out of 5 is still excellent. It was just not my favorite of the series. Next up, we have a sci-fi called The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson. This book was a lot of fun. I haven't read a lot of sci-fi before, and it's something I kind of want to make a priority this year. And this one sounded really cool, and having read it now, I think this is actually a really great place to start with sci-fi if you're looking to get into the genre, because it doesn't get too in like the weeds about the technology of what's going on. It's more just a vehicle to take you on this really cool adventure. So in this book, humanity has discovered how to travel between alternate realities. The only catch is you can't travel to a reality where you still currently exist. The universe rejects you. It either bounces your body back totally broken and you're dead, or it lets you through and you're broken and you're dead. So it's kind of intense. And when they first discover this, a lot of the scientists that discovered this technology try to go through themselves and end up dying because they exist in these alternate realities. And so what they do is they end up finding people with kind of rougher backgrounds, or they're from like worse off places. So it explores kind of privilege and social class a lot in this book, because these people are specifically chosen because of their rough backgrounds. They're not necessarily afforded citizenship in the city where this takes place. Our main character is from sort of a wastelandy bit in the outskirts of a really nice city, and this part of the novel really reminds me of Mad Max. So if you are a fan of that, I would definitely recommend this. And so this character, Kara, is chosen because out of the 380 something worlds that this Earth Zero can connect to, she's dead on 372. So she's a really valuable member of this company, and basically they end up firing a bunch of other people because she can travel to worlds that a lot of other people can't because she's dead on so many. And the novel really kicks off with an additional version of herself dying. So she's able to access a world she hasn't been able to in the past, and she goes to this world, and there are startling revelations about her own world in this one. And she really has to reconcile that reality, her own reality, who she could be, who she's been in all of these different worlds and stuff. And it really makes her question sort of the value of being a member of the society. And it's really action-packed. It's a lot of fun. Again, it has a very big Mad Max element that I wasn't expecting, especially for like a sci-fi novel. There are like people with these big bikes and cars that like run other people down. It's really intense. And it does have a little bit of body horror if that's something that bothers you, but it's not like a big part of the novel by any means. But I gave this a 5 out of 5. This was such a fun ride. I read most of this in one sitting. I feel like I never hear anybody talking about this. I know it was a book of the month choice, maybe not the most popular, but it was a lot of fun. If you like sci-fi, I definitely recommend it. This next one is my last novel of the month, and that is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This was the Owl Crate selection for December 2020, so I wanted to read this pretty quickly. It's been getting a lot of buzz online. TikTok especially loves this book. I gave it a 3 out of 5. I have very mixed feelings on this one. Again, 3 out of 5 is not a bad score. I liked it. I think I just was expecting to like it a bit more. Again, it's been quite hyped, so I was really excited to get into this. And part of my excitement was I was looking for more of like a romance this month. Most of my books this month really haven't had a romantic element, and I do enjoy that in a book. So where this is a Romeo and Juliet retelling, I was like, yes, let's go. So this takes place in 1920s Shanghai. And again, is a Romeo and Juliet retelling, but instead of noble families, it's these two warring gangs. They have like this really intense blood feud. It's the Scarlet Gang and the White Flowers. And the Scarlet Gang are Shanghai natives, while the White Flowers are Russian immigrants. And they're vying for control over the city. So it's a really political thing happening, because during the 1920s, you have like these gangs, but then you have the rise of the Communist Party in China. That's really changing how things are going in the city. And then there's also really rampant colonialism and Western influence that's just totally changing the fabric of the city itself. So our main character, Juliet, who is the daughter of the Scarlet Gang, or she's the heiress of the Scarlet Gang, really has to like kind of reconcile like what her city has become. And she herself was sent to New York to live for a while, so she worries that she's too Western to really be taken seriously as the next member, or the next leader of this gang. And she's also mad at how much her city is changing. So again, it has a very like political and socioeconomic thing happening at the forefront of this novel. And on top of all of that, you have a monster that is causing this plague-like madness. People are ripping their own throats out really violently for seemingly no reason whatsoever. And if you try to stop them, they will not stop. Something's like affecting their brains that's making them feel the need to do this. And so gang members of both the Scarlet Gang and the White Flowers are dropping left and right. She's trying to figure out why, and she's forced to work together with her former lover, Roma, who is the heir of the White Flowers. They have to come together and solve, like, what the heck is going on and how do we stop this? So, again, it's this really intense political thing and horrifying sickness that's really taking the forefront of the story. And the romance is sitting on the back burner. It is the B plot. And that's fine. It's just not what I wanted. I wanted angst. I wanted yearning. And you do get a little bit more so from Juliet's perspective in like the first half of the novel, of her like feeling defensive around him because he betrayed her. And she's still really bitter about that years later. And she feels the need to like protect her heart from him. But that's kind of all you get in the first half. In the second half, it picks up a little bit more because they're forced to work together. But again, not the forefront of this story at all. And a book that relies so heavily on marketing itself as a Romeo and Juliet retelling. Again, I wanted more romance. And I'm not mad. The plot of the story was really good. I think it was sort of a matter of what I expected versus what we got. And so maybe in some time, I'll up the score, especially with the next book, Our Violent Ends, coming out, I believe, this year. Maybe that one will have more of it, or maybe my expectations will be a little bit more managed. I feel like I'm gonna like that one more. I don't know why, but I feel it in my bones. This was really good. Again, 3 out of 5, not a bad score by any means. I will say, big trigger warning if you have a problem with gore or body horror or bugs. Maybe don't pick this one up. But honestly, some of the stuff was so horrifying, it could honestly be read in like October if you're looking for kind of a spooky, scary book, because there are some spooky, scary scenes in this one. And wrapping up this month, we've got 2 graphic novels, volumes 2 and 3 of Saga, where these are, sequels in a series. I can't get too deeply into the plot of what's happening in these ones, but the series follows Alana and Marcus, and they are lovers from 2 warring sides of a generations long battle between this planet called Landfall and its moon Wreath. And this battle's been going on so long, I don't even think they remember why it started, but it's transcended their own planets and really affected the galaxy as a whole. So more than just these 2 cultures are affected by this really long war. And Marcus is a prisoner of war on Landfall, and Alana is the soldier in charge of guarding him, I guess, or she works at the facility keeping him prisoner. And they end up bonding over this book that on the surface kind of just seems like a romance, like really fluffy, nothing read. But it has this subtext of like peace and coming together and rejecting war and stuff. And they both find this absolutely beautiful. And Alana is just so taken with Marcus. She thinks he's a beautiful human being, like in spirit. And so she ends up breaking him out of jail, and they basically go on the run together. And this has never happened before. This is something that is completely unheard of from both their cultures, and they're both disgusted by the idea that, someone from Wreath and someone from Landfall could be together. And while they're on the run, they end up getting pregnant. And the first novel covers the birth of their baby and the immediate aftermath. And they have bounty hunters after them. Those are really fun characters. They have a robot prince who's also after them. It's such a lovely mix of sci-fi and fantasy, family, and coming together, and, rejecting the idea that this war is something that they have to keep up with just because it's been happening for so long. It's such a well done series. The artwork is beautiful. I'm constantly amazed that, like, the quality of art is able to be maintained throughout these graphic novels. And it's not just like the covers, sometimes I feel like you get a graphic novel and the cover is like this amazing piece of work, and for the sake of ease, the artwork has to be simplified throughout the book. That's not the case with these at all. So I gave both of these a 5 out of 5. I just finished book 3, and this whole series has been a 5 out of 5 for me. It's excellent, and I always look forward to reading these. I have to kind of pace myself because there's only 9 volumes out at the moment, and I don't want to burn through them all really fast, but I also don't want to stop reading them. But yeah, both of these were 5 out of 5s. I also listened to 2 audiobooks this month on my commute to work. The first one was Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man by Emmanuel Acho. He has a YouTube series of the same name, and it's so good. It's hard, I think, sometimes as a white person to confront things that challenge your worldview. He answers these questions very earnestly and honestly and without judgment. And I think as someone who's starting out trying to get into more like anti-racist reading, it's a really good starting point, because you're not meant to be comfortable listening to these. That's kind of the whole point, is you're meant to be uncomfortable. I listened to the audiobook for this. He also narrated it, so that was really nice, especially if you're a fan of the YouTube series. It feels kind of like an extension of that. He does cover some of the same material, and he references the series a lot, but I definitely recommend this one if you're looking to read more into anti-racist issues. So I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. And the other audiobook I listened to was Daisy Jones and the Six. This is a novel. This one blew me away. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars too. If you haven't listened to the audiobook version of this, you need to. It is a full cast of characters and actors and stuff that you actually might recognize. It's got Benjamin Bratt, Judy Greer, Pablo Schreiber, and the story follows a fictional band from the 1970s and their rise to fame and what made them so great and their experiences recording this amazing album called Aurora. The dynamics of the band is kind of like Fleetwood Mac-y. I think that was one of Taylor Jenkins Reid's main inspirations. You can tell. But it's definitely its own thing. And I forgot that it was fake sometimes. You know, I think, again, having like this full cast doing each and every band member, it was done interview style, so it feels like you're listening to a documentary. And especially towards the end, some of the performances, it felt so real. You could like feel their pain in recounting some of these like harder things that they went through. And it was just done so well. And I gave this one a 5 out of 5. If Goodreads did half stars, I would probably give this one a 4.5 out of 5, just because it felt so real, and they're talking about their experiences writing these songs, and they're saying the lyrics and stuff, but you don't get any of the music. And I know it's a book, it's, you know, adapted from a book, so obviously there's no music composed for that. All you have is the words, but it just, where it felt so real otherwise, that felt like a really big missing piece. And I don't want to I don't want to punish it too much for not having any music, because that's, you know, the format, but I am really excited. I believe Amazon is adapting it as a mini-series, so it was made to be on television or in a theater or something. It felt slightly incomplete without that aspect, because you're talking about how great this band is, but you can't hear any of the music. But it was a really good story, you know, otherwise. I've never read any Taylor Jenkins Reid before, so now I need to go pick up Evelyn Hugo, I guess, because that's a really also well-reviewed book by her. So yeah, that was excellent. If you haven't listened to, even if you've read the book, if you haven't listened to the audiobook, go listen to it. All right, and that wraps up all my books for January. I think I read 13 books total, including the audiobooks and graphic novels and stuff. So I feel like that's a pretty strong start to the year. My Goodreads goal right now is 65 books. So I think that's like about 20% of the way through, I think. So doing all right. Let me know down below, what did you read this month? Did you read any of these books? And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you like this content, and have a great day. Bye.